It's because of the macho of all that. The way you get to be an Afghanistan soldier is you take somebody who hasn't got anything and you offer him a gun. Now he's instantly an Afghan. He's a soldier. He's on your side, willing to kill for you. All it takes is to give the guy a gun. So that macho then is an openness, and it comes from the animal world. All right, so we can transcend that. We can forgive it and say that that's what comes from the animal world. You know, one of the things a man has to learn is how to handle his testosterone, right? One of the challenges of adolescence. And the girl's problem is how to handle his testosterone too, right? As well as her own, because she also has testosterone. Okay, so we transcend a thing when we accept it, we accept it when we forgive it, and we feel merciful towards our own ego and that of others. People cannot help but be the way they are. And all the hypothetical objections that they could be other than they were, the hypothetical has no reality. There's no reality in the hypothetical. You hear it used all the time in bureaucratic, what do you call it, political arguments. The hypothetical is always posed, and then the defendant is supposed to defend himself against the hypothetical. His trap, and the O'Reilly factor is one of them, is he gets trapped all the time. Somebody poses the hypothetical, and he takes it as the real and then argues against the hypothetical. You just say that's the hypothetical and doesn't require any argument, but he gets caught in it. Defending himself against the hypothetical. Well, what if everybody thought like you did? Then we wouldn't know. Well, that's not a fact. There's 6 billion people on the planet. 6 billion people are not going to think that way all at the same instant, so it's not going to happen, so it doesn't have to be answered is the right way to look at it, right? All right, so forgiveness then is very, very important in the spiritual work. This is a level we all struggle for with our egos, to be merciful towards ourselves, harmonious with others, accepting of ourselves and others without condemning them. So here's where we get off condemnation of others, right and wrong, judgmentalism, and righteousness, which is the worst of all the ego, prideful positions. Oh. We transcend, and as we do, we come into understanding and capacity to comprehend, and we reach this wonderful level called reason. Reason, in which God becomes wisdom, life becomes meaningful. My life is meaningful, so is yours, and so is all of society. You see, down here it's seen as hopeless, or here it's seen as awful, or sinful, or terrible, or frightening. But now we see it as meaningful, we get curious. So in the 400s, you see great curiosity. Everybody thinks, well, the intellect, that's truly human. No, the intellect, as we see until we become enlightened, everything all the way up the scale is still a refinement of the animal. The base of the intellect is curiosity, wanting to know. What's here? What is this for? What's this do? What does that mean on there, Pepsi? Why is it red and blue? See? Curiosity. Where do you see curiosity arise in the evolution of consciousness in the animal? The animal's survival depends on curiosity. It's always nosing around, sniffing that, looking here, looking there. I look out my window and watch our animals, and they're all going here, sniff this, sniff that. So, so the animal then is still with us, and it's dangerous, as Eve found out. The desire to know, curiosity. Eat the apple of what? The apple of something, some tree. Not supposed to eat that tree. She just had to know what the hell that was like, right? So that was the animal, just couldn't stop sniffing, poking its nose in. The downside of the animal then is you get trapped in curiosity. And we're not talking about directly enlightenment itself today, but we will later. The person struggling for enlightenment, you have to watch curiosity as a trap. Sedona is full of people trapped by spiritual curiosity. They're into every kind of new age circus and sideshow. Huh? They get distracted for years following all kinds of leftovers from ancient Mesopotamia, you know what I'm saying, in which there's a spiritual sideshow going on all the time, from psychic reading here to the running the ruins on you there, to casting the stones, to doing your numbers, to reading the sole of your foot, to reeling your hand, looking in your eyes, to pulling your ears, counting the vertebrae, counting your bumps, phrenology, I mean the whole deal. You can spend lifetimes. There's people here probably in the audience who spent years following some crazy track, you know. The esoteric, fascination of the esoteric. So it's a sideshow, folks. And you know, here there's the throwing the balls, and there's the thing. It's just like a sideshow. It's like you walk down the sideshow, the same things. And here's the acrobats blowing smoke out of their ears with needles stuck in them. Weighs 82 pounds. He hasn't moved in 14 years. No. The last time he ate was 1937. Oh, he must be divine. He's an idiot, man. He's like trapped in this. You have to, all right, so if we're animals and the animal is curious, naturally, I checked them all out too, didn't you? Anybody here failed to check it out? Oh, well, God, you got a lot more books to read. You have to read every guru. Baba idiot, Baba dum-dum, Baba gaga, Baba. Smoke goes out of his ears. They have millions of followers, folks, so it's big business. Big business. People come from all over the world to meet Baba Simple. All right, so curiosity then. So for the person who's dedicated to enlightenment, however, that's a trap. You haven't got time. The Buddha said, waste no time. And in the book, one of the books, first one, I think, the second one, forgot, second one, I think it says, it opens with, waste no time. You don't have time to check all that out. If you're devoted to reaching some degree of enlightenment, you don't have time to check out the astral circus. It's amusement, it's intriguing. What's intriguing about it is that it comes from elsewhere. Anything that's invisible and comes from elsewhere must be divine. So the difficulty is it doesn't know the difference between religion and spirituality. It doesn't know the difference between the occult and spirituality. The downside of Sedona is it doesn't know the difference between the occult and spirituality. The difficulty with the traditional world, especially of Europe, is it doesn't know the difference between spirituality and religion. The Constitution of the United States, which calibrates at 700, clearly defines the difference between religion and spirituality. It says spirituality okay, but no establishment of religion. So trust in God is spiritually integrous with the Constitution, making the government Catholic is not. So, all right, so the interesting thing about the 400s is there's a great increase in power because you don't have to lift barrels in order to count them. In the lower levels, you got to lift all those barrels to count them. 1, 2. When you get the intellect is born, you go 4 times 2 is 8. Thank you. You don't have to lift any of them. You already got how many's there. So your control now of the world of form is enormous because you can abstract. You can deal with abstracts. The computer is, of course, a very advanced capacity to deal with symbols and their abstract significance. The downside of the intellect, however, is quite sizable. Because it's also prone to error. It thinks because a thing exists as a concept, therefore it has a comparable representation in reality, which is not so at all. So the downside of intellectualism, which we hear every night on television, everybody's got some intellectual scheme. Last night it was right after the World Trade Center, we should have talked to those people. Oh, yeah, right, okay. Okay, we should have talked to those people, yeah. Yeah, thanks, you go talk to them, okay? And I'll wait here, you tell me what, okay, you know. Before World War II, most people, a lot of people haven't lived before World War II, there was endless talking. Every bureaucrat in the entire face of the world was talking. Everybody talked themselves blue in the face. No, it takes more than talking, folks. And all right, so anyway, the downside of the intellect then is that it thinks that the hypothetical is real, deals with the hypothetical as though it was a reality, and doesn't know its own limitations. So the ego, the downside of the intellect, the upside you might say is science. The downside is the egotism of science. It doesn't know its own limits. There's nothing built within the intellect to tell it when it's out of its own field, because the intellect is perfect for dealing with the concrete, and it's good for dealing with abstractions of the concrete. A true scientist knows the limitation of science. If you see people on television, there's always some pseudoscientist trying to disprove all spiritual concepts, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. There's professionals they're on all the time. Their whole life is dedicated to disproving any reality of the non-physical domain. Their stake is heavily into physicality. The joke is, it's the non-physicality of their subjective consciousness that allows them to think that objective physicality is all there is to life. But I mean, that's just a little paradox that I see. Because that's an abstraction, you know, to think that. Anyway, so the 400s, of course, is the world of the intellect. It's the world of modern science, civilization, the university. The great books of the Western world, which I was very fortunate to have a set. I was doing writing and I needed references. I went to Sedona Library, it was having a sale, and for $500 I picked up a complete set of 1932 University of Chicago Great Books of the Western World, which I really prize because it's the greatest thinking of which man has been capable of, you know, since the time of the ancient Greeks, and right down until the last book is Freud. Anyway, I hope I can write some newer ones since Freud. Anyway, I think it starts out with, but anyway, as a kid, that's what I loved, reading the encyclopedia. And I still, if I could have a simultaneous other lifetime, I would spend it reading the great books of the Western world, because it's just beautiful, the capacity of the human mind to address certain very difficult issues. Of course, it doesn't solve the doesn't solve them, because then there wouldn't be any more volumes to it, right? Because the ego cannot go beyond itself. So a true scientist says to you when a spiritual argument comes up, I don't know, that's beyond the realm of science. There's an honest man for you. It's beyond the realm of science. He doesn't try to prove that the experience of the presence of God is due to a lesion in the parietal region of the brain here. There's a guy who was all getting on television. He's always getting near-death and near-death experiences and things like that, out-of-body experiences, and trying to prove that it's due to some locus in the brain or something very interesting. Of course, the way you differentiate is you calibrate the level of consciousness before and after the experience. Before and after a spurious experience, the consciousness level remains the same. Before and after a true experience, it shows an enormous jump. Let me just ask in this case here. The jump after the experience in the snowbank was over 50, 60, 80, 90, 100, 150, 160, 180, 200, 300. The jump in the snowbank of this entity here, they almost froze to death at age 11 and 12. Before the experience and after the experience, it jumped 300 points after the experience. The presence of God prevailed, you know, and I wrote about it in the book. Anyway, I got out of the snowbank into the snow, and this profound, unbelievable. You just melted in the presence of that which is infinite, wordless, beyond all form, not different than what you are, strangely. At age 12, that was what I was experiencing, was not different than the reality of the inner sense of I, but it was all nonverbal. And I never explained it to anybody, I never mentioned it to anybody. But that jumped at 300 points. You can't do that by poking if you poke something in the parietal region of the brain, and you're 410 when you started. After the surgery, you'll still be 410. So that's how you can tell whether it's genuine or not genuine. How about the out-of-body experience? Let's see if that had an effect. The out-of-body experience, when I was in sick in bed, I was 6 feet over the bed. That resulted in an elevation of consciousness resist. No, it didn't, see? Out of body. As strange as it was highly educational. To be weightless in the middle of space, it was great. I mean, I'm all for it. But the person came back the same. It was just strange. Indescribable. In those days, nobody ever wrote about such things, and I never discussed it with anybody except my analyst. We both decided it was a toxic condition of the brain, and it caused a projection of the body image into a seemingness out. Well, we let it go at that. I don't know. We never heard about it. Anyway, because TV confuses the two, I just thought I'd demonstrate. Before and after the out-of-body experience, which was quite surprising. It happened back in the 50s, and nobody was on TV about it in those days. And it was the same. But the near-death experience was profound. The residual of the near-death experience, which I never spoke about until I wrote about it, I think in '95 in that book, Power versus Force, the residual was a complete elimination of fear of death. And during World War II, I had no fear of death at all. Mines could be going off, and minesweepers blowing up, and people drowning. I mean, I was interested in, whether we had coffee this morning. The generator is out because we had an electromagnetic tail and took all the power, so there's no coffee. Well, that was the tragedy of the day, no coffee, now that you're going to get blown up. But that, you can't do that intellectually. If it happens of its own. So you can't say, gee, look at me, I'm fearless, because it's just a side effect of that phenomenon. People who've had heart attacks and survived and near-death experiences, that's very common. The fear of death disappears. So there's a transformation of consciousness. All right, so the reason accomplishes a great deal. We see God as, so this is the world of theology, the world of theology. Going to theological university, you study about God and reason and comparative religion, and it's all very fascinating. I find it very interesting. Very interesting. All right, so that's me. All right, now we're going to go from there, and this is a movement. This is a movement of sudden, like, reverence and lovingness, in which your view of yourself and others is benign, and it's sort of a falling in love. It happens to almost everybody spontaneously. You'd be walking along in the woods, and some little dog walks along, and all of a sudden you feel like a sense of delight, unplanned moment, out of nowhere. You were worrying about paying the rent, and all of a sudden, here's a sense of joyfulness. A dog's wagging tail. Let's do it. We did it last time, but I always like to do the dog's wagging tail. That little white dog, his wagging tail is over 500 resist. That little white dog just charmed us. In a small town, and this workman's dog, cute little white dog, jumps out of the back of his truck, comes over. He just loved you up like crazy, and he wanted you to love him up. And it was a 500 experience. I said, "Can a dog be 500?" Yes. By God, a dog can be 500. A dog's wagging tail is 500. And as I also say every lecture, a kitty's purr is also 500.
Yeah, well, kitty's purr is what I was going to ask. But what I was going to ask, Dr. Hopkins, is when you talk about the animal brain below 200, how does that fit? Is that just the purity of consciousness, wagging dog and kitty?
The brain is, I'm just speaking of it as anatomical structure which arose through the animal world. However, it can be used for divine purposes, by the time you reach the evolution of the human. What was originally designed just as a dagger or something can be used. So intention and purpose now begins to change the use of this complex machine, just like your computer can be used to watch porn on the internet, or it can be used to do research in the most advanced subjects. So now this animal brain, which is the substrate of the physicality of what goes on in our skull, by intention can be made to serve higher purposes, lead to spiritual evolution. Along the way, let's see, I wish there were 3 or 4 of myself, because simultaneously there's at least half a dozen things I'd like to be researching every minute, see? I'd like to have one group here, one group here, one group here. I'd like to check out, how is it that the kitty's purr is 500 and the dog's tail is 500, huh? That's greater than most of the people on the planet. We showed you 78% of the people on the planet are below 200, forget 500. Of course, the kitty's not always at 200. Kitty's not always at 200. Any more than the dog is always at 500, but neither is the human being. So, but for some peculiar reason, there's some karmic and probably very interesting and entertaining reason behind this, which, as I say, if we had more years and time to check out why is it that the animal, in this particular animal, is capable of love, and why is this animal capable of love? Well, we know the herbivorous animals in general tend to be lovable, but the canine and the cat, you know, are also carnivores. So here we have 2 carnivores that have a capability of lovingness. We all know how a cat goes for lovingness, and our cat is very attracted to lovingness and loves people when they come in the house, and if they like kitties, they instantly it's a match. So here we have this reflection of human love coming up in animals that are more capable of love than 78% of the human population. That gorilla Coco calibrates over, I think Coco calibrates 240, right? We said Coco, we have permission, calibrates over 240, 250, 260. Coco calibrates at 250, gorilla. She, you know, Coco's famous and frequently on the public education channels. And Coco's quite famous, you know, and has learned a great deal about humans, and has a lot of human motivations, seemingly human motivations, including love, and is able to think and reason and use sign language, and interestingly can put together concepts and construct a sentence. Coco can actually construct a sentence and communicate with humans. I don't know the reason for that. But you're safer with Coco than 78% of the people on the planet. 78% of the people on the planet will steal you blind. Coco knows that's your hamburger, and we'll sit back and let you wait, because that's your hamburger. Yes?
For each individual human, does the calibration, is there an average, or do you go up and down significantly during the day or the week or the month, depending on your behaviors?
How stable is that level of consciousness? The level of consciousness is set by apparently by karmic merit, which is the totality, the composite of spiritual decisions of the spiritual will. It's the spiritual will that is the source of the center from which you evolve spiritually. The center out of which you come for your spiritual work is the spiritual will. It's the spiritual will which sets karma, and not necessarily actions. That is correct, is it? That is correct. Spiritual will. So you see, your feelings and your emotions shift up and down the scale here all the time, but that doesn't change your intention. Your intention is quite a deliberate thing. So your intention is more or less the stabilizer of the ship, see? And you make little corrections, you know, when you're driving, you make little constant corrections in the wheel. But your intention is to drive east, you will continue to drive east. So these are fluctuations. We all periodically get annoyed, angry, fearful, etc. But our intention remains the same. So intention of this, a decision of the spiritual will is apparently what sets karma. It's when you've had a chance to think about it, reflect on it, and decide to make that move, then now that is permanent. So every action, thought, feeling, every decision we make is then reflected in the infinite field of consciousness where it is retrievable forever. The reason kinesiology works is we can go back and get what was the level of consciousness of Napoleon we find out that many world leaders, including spiritual great gurus, etc., calibrate higher in the beginning of their careers than later. This is true of Napoleon, who was about 450 in the beginning, and then after a while, they get pulled down by the ego, greed and power over others, and selfishness and arrogance. So Napoleon didn't stay at 450. Before he died, Napoleon was, we have permission to do Napoleon. Before he died, Napoleon was over 200 resist. He was over 240. Napoleon had dropped, well, about 300 points, calibrated levels of consciousness. We see this also on very famous gurus who gain great millions of followers and world fame, and etc. And the beginning of their careers, they usually calibrate in the 500s, and they write books that are famous, etc. And then you say, what is the level of this writing? It's 500. What is the level of this writer now? Sometimes under 200. I was shocked. People with great names, and everybody go, ooh and ah when you mention their name. You know, calibrated in the low 200s, and some even below 200. So that means that you can choose to go up or you can choose to go down. Oh, you can choose to go up or choose to go down. So as Napoleon or Hitler won, Hitler I think was higher than he ended up. Where was Hitler when he wrote Mein Kampf? Adolf Hitler, we have permission to resist, was over 200 when he wrote Mein Kampf, 250. He was over 245, 250. So he was into nationalism, 250. When he wrote Mein Kampf, he was in prison at the time for a failed push, you remember? All right, Hitler, before he died, we have permission to resist. Before he died, he was over 60. So, all right, the spiritual will, he had many, many times to change his mind. But the reaffirmation of that direction apparently is what sets the karma. So the karma then is like a little traveling program, a little computer chip in your spirit body, and it pretty much determines where you're going to go and how you're going to behave and what's going to happen. Is that predestination? Well, predestination is just a term. You could call it that. You could say what befalls you in this lifetime is a combination of karma plus your exercise of the freedom of choice. On the other hand, karma has limited your choices. You know, you can't decide right now to become a squirrel in the next instant. You know what I mean? Your choices are limited. You can decide to be poor in a hurry, but rich in a hurry takes longer. Revelation, all right. So 500 is the beginning, I call it, 500 is the beginning of a revelation, that there's something more to life than just this stuff down here. Beginning of a revelation. You see, although the world is described in terms of Newtonian paradigm of reality and the lower levels of the ego, life is lived in the subjective experience, which is indefinable. That which is experiencing that you're here now listening to the words, you don't even have to pay attention to the words, what they're saying. Heck with it. You're still aware that you are here, right? So one is innately aware of one's existence and what is being registered in consciousness, and that's where we live. That's where we live. When you get a new car, the thrill, the excitement is experienced subjectively. There's nothing objective out there. The car's not happy. There's some inner indefinable, and it's beyond form. Form may trigger the experience in the form of a car or winning the lottery. That may trigger it. But all experience is subjective. The only reality there is subjectivity. That's the essence of Eye of the I. And the book that I'm finishing now called I is that the presence of God is found through absolute subjectivity, radical subjectivity. Yes?
Can someone have a split consciousness?
Can someone have a split consciousness?
Yes. That brings up a whole different subject.
Can someone have a split consciousness?
Yes, I'm going to repeat that. Can somebody have a split consciousness? That brings up a whole different subject. We have time for it, I think. No, we don't. We only have a few minutes. Brings up the question of possession and more than one personality in one body, multiple personality disorder. It brings up the fact that entities of different realms can forcefully sometimes take over the consciousness of the human being. A human being can focus and by karmic propensity, by some karmic event, allow for, let's say, some lower astral to take temporary possession of the body and possession of your consciousness. So you think that things are happening that are really going on in a different domain, crossing over from one domain to another. We had an entity coming up from another country, and very insistent, sent all kinds of faxes. We would answer the faxes. Some of the faxes would be sensible, and then faxes would come through that were really stupid. I said, we already answered that, you know. This person insisted on coming all the way from Australia to see me, see? And we refused. We said, no, we can't do that. We didn't want to do it. Anyway, this entity was on the one hand well-meaning, calibrating in the 300s. And then a week later, a completely ridiculous fax had come through. And what that entity calibrated at what?
50 or
Yeah, very low, 70, right?
I don't know.
We have permission to ask that entity. That entity was over 50, 60. Yeah, that entity was around 60. Both in the same body. So sometimes this guy would be really nice, doing everything for the good of mankind. The next thing he had really an evil intent about his visit to me, and I was very happy that he didn't get to meet me, or I might not even be here. So, yes, there is a possibility, and it's a karmic, I think it's karmic inheritance, right? Karmic inheritance. One opening for it is blasphemy, resist. One opening for it is to curse others to hell, resist. All right, so there are very negative spiritual decisions you can make that will then open the later karmic possibility for that which you've just called in to visit you folks. You curse somebody to hell, now you get to see what hell's like. So some of the patients we see in the hospitals that are calibrating like 35 are doing so because of past serious spiritual errors. That may correct it. It agrees with religion in some degree, that there are some things for which the Holy Spirit cannot forgive you. You'll have to work out the karma of that yourself.
Is there anything beyond choice?
Right?
Is there anything beyond choice?
The question is really one of levels of consciousness. At a certain level of consciousness, choice is quite possible. It's more hypothetical than real, but it is also real. There are certain levels where choice is not possible. In the highest realms, no choice is going on. Everything is happening of its own as an expression of what in Sanskrit is called the Purusha, the presence of God within as self, which is manifesting through the human physicality as, let's say, the speakingness. There's no choice involved in this speakingness. It happens of its own. And so there are varying levels. So as we go up the higher levels of consciousness, we'll get to that. So forgiveness, acceptance, reason, you come up to lovingness, which is the realm of most interest to spiritual people. Spiritual people are worried about how to get over the ego, how to get over the guilt of the ego, etc., and despair over it, and how to get to love. Love is at 500, and it's a whole different domain. Love is really the dawning of the light of the presence of God within human consciousness in the nonlinear domain. At 500, you're well beyond the Newtonian. The Newtonian really reigns up through reason. 500 now, at 500, the nonlinear begins to take precedence. It's lovingness that makes the decisions, that is the background of your decision, lights up your decisions. And most people in spiritual communities, spiritual work groups such as this and others, are committed to reaching 540. 540 is unconditional love. That's the saint. The saint is actually 575, but unconditional love calibrates at 540. That's what we all strive for. Most people in the spiritual work strive first for love and are delighted with it, and then the energy of that love leads them to drive on, and they despair over any limitation. That's the spiritual dilemma of the United States, our citizens, and how to handle bin Laden. And you saw the endless discussions of ethics and morality, and certainly the United States has become reawakened to the seriousness of morality and what is ethical, what is the ethical, spiritual, what is the right way to handle this. And the president being Christian and expresses Christian values, you know, what is the position? What has the position of the church been? You know, I forget who it was, St. Whatchamacallit, talked about justified war. You know, when is war justified? So we have this in the 500s then, you have the whole dilemma. Down below, it's no problem. Blow the sucker away, you know what I mean? It's no problem. Up there, there's the confusion of Christ saying, turn the other cheek. So you get the sort of liberal wing which says, well, you know, passivity. No, Jesus said, when he said, turn the other cheek, you know. He also said, he says spiritually. And he also said, render unto God that which is God's, and unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. So what he's saying, don't mix levels. Don't mix levels. Don't mix levels. The Native American Indian is quite aware of that. He prays and asks the animal for forgiveness, and he loves him and he loves us and he appreciates his life as he kills him. So he understands, the Native American understands there's different levels. There's the physical level where without this I cannot live. And you are sacrificing your life for me, for which I give thanks to the Great Spirit. A sanctification of life. So intention then is what sets the karma. Intention is what sets the karma. Unconditional love then is the capacity to be in love. It's really in love with life. You'd be driving along and all of a sudden you just feel a surge of joy. You're just sort of in love with life itself. And at 540 you pretty much do fall in love with everybody, and people who belong to 12-step organizations know what that's like. You leave your judgmentalism at the door, and everyone is unconditionally loving to the best of their ability. It leads to a saintliness, and it brings you into serenity, a joyfulness, a feeling of completion. God is infinite love, and the joy of life is that the source of that life is the love of God, and that takes you into a sort of an exquisite state, which is transfiguring. 540 is transfiguring. Your inner life is one of serenity, although your emotions may jump around. They're not who you are, because the persona, the personality which interacts with the world is not who you are, and you're not, you know, along the way to spiritual work, you realize that it's not what you are anyway. You know, why are you wasting time with it? You know, it doesn't mean anything. And you could drop it at any time, you know, and say, why don't you drop that? Yeah, okay. So it's not who you are, see, because if it's who you are, you're not going to drop it no matter what, because that's intention. But emotionality can come and go and not mean anything, and even a saint can get annoyed with something. And it doesn't mean he's not saintly, you know, but if you ask him, does he believe that? He doesn't believe that, no. It's just the animal talking. So the animal will talk, if you step on his toes, it'll say, like that, but that's not who you really are. All right, illumination and bliss, at 600, there's a transformation which occurs with the surrendering of all sense of self as the ego. Then, so 600 is the crossover from I as limitation and form to I as the field, as consciousness itself, as the subjective sense of I. The sense of I is coming out of an infinite, non-personal I, which as it comes through you, you personalize and give it a discrete meanness. But that's late in the process of awareness. The one thing everybody in this room is unanimous on is, we're going to quit now, is that you are. Anybody disagree? Well, the only thing you can say with absolute certainty is that you are. And even at about 8:40, you're going to have to let that one go and not even know whether you are or are not, because that again becomes an abstraction. To be or not be is already, again, an absurdity to be let go of at 8:40. So now we've pretty much described the world, you know, a circus, a game board. The ego is an endless game board, and your TV is your latest tune-in on the game board of the ego as it plays out there in what originated as the animal world has now been infused with spirit, and you see the ego playing itself out. And so the news is no longer, depressing any more than your little animal's depressing. Are you depressed? No, he's a good fellow. You see he's a good fellow. He's done everything I asked him this morning. What more could you ask? Huh? He even purrs at times. Let's hear a purr. Can you wag your tail? So you make friends with your little animal. Stop being angry at it. Forgive it. Adopt it. Take responsibility of it. Cheer it on. Cheer it on. Life as a human being is extremely difficult. Jesus Christ said the same thing. You're between the physicality, the instinctual world, the animal, and the knowingness of the spiritual domain. That is a very purgatorial almost way. Is this a purgatorial expression, this world? Yeah, resist. Yes, it is. Options. We said there are multiple heavens this morning. Did we say that here to the crowd? Oh, multiple heavens, multiple. So it's a multi-dimensional universe. It's not just heaven, hell, and earth, but an enormous, infinite number of possibilities on all levels of existence. Wow. Thank you. It's 1 o'clock. We were looking at somebody has choices, you know. A lot of choices are really decisions. Choices come and go, but decisions are more long-lasting. Like the person said, I couldn't decide whether to go to a movie or commit suicide. The option to see life as absurd is always there. To see it as comical is always there. To see it as sad and tragic is always there. The ego, of course, gets great benefit from choosing the lower positions, you know. Your ego can't hang out too long if it starts picking up there all the time. So it likes to get into self-pity and get on channel 15 and sob. 5:30 on channel 15 is sob time. No, 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock on channel 15 is where everybody gets to cry and blubber and tell you how sad their life is. And it's good for, you can juice that for a lifetime, you know what I mean? Pick a tragedy and mull on it and play off of it. So the ego gets great satisfactions out of these lower things. Seeing as this group here is interested in spiritual evolution, how do you get out of this? There's more than just choice. I mean, it's understanding the nature of the ego. the ego gets enormous gain out of the bottom of the chart. There's nothing better than self-pity, nurturing hatreds, nurturing anger, nurturing for a lifetime injustices. If you lack an injustice, you can look back at your ancestors and find somebody who persecuted them, and you can get into that one. Everybody comes from somewhere back in time, and somewhere back in time the Goths invaded you, or the Anglos, or the Saxons, or the Normans. You know what I mean? You can always get revenge against somebody and adopt a political position and get banners and raise money from the government. You know what I mean? You can always get it by, so even if you lack tragedies in your life, I'm sure if we look into your ethnic background, we'll find tragedies. And so justification for positionality is one of the jobs of the mind to perpetuate its existence. The ego is self-perpetuating. And it gets its energy out of the way it juices the lower positions. You'd say, well, why do 78% of the people want to stay in a non-integrous position in life? First of all, they don't know it's integrous. As far as they're concerned, it's integrous. Killing your enemies is heroic, right? So ignorance prevails over the whole field, but the payoff that people get out of these ego positions is what gives them their energy. So we pretty much covered the course, the map. Most people here are familiar with it. It's in the book Power versus Force. It's in Eye of the Eye. We'll reprint it again in Eye. The interesting thing was that consciousness, first of all, humans cannot tell the difference between truth or falsehood. This certainly gives that which is fallacious a tremendous edge. Between the yearning of the ego for something to juice and not knowing the difference between truth and falsehood, you wonder that mankind got as far as it did. And finally in '86 it crossed over for karmic reasons. When we asked, why was that so? It said the collective mankind, karma of mankind had justified it. So that the spiritual work of people who did, that was being done at times of real great darkness, manifested as an advancement in the level of consciousness of all of mankind from which we all benefit. So our spiritual work constantly benefits others, and even if that's not a conscious intention, but that's the nature of consciousness. We had a fun question here during the interim, which I will have to really put up on my wall at home. It says, please define God. All right, folks. You asked for it. Well, to begin with, you need 4 years in a theologic seminary to start the discussion. You have to study all the theologians throughout all of history. We've calibrated a lot of them, and actually theologians is a list of the things that we're calibrating. So to define then is the work of the intellect. To define means to make comprehensible, to reason. So the question is coming up in the 400s. The question has to do with theology. Theology is in the 400s. The Buddha, of course, did not define God for the very good reason that the definitions of God are not what God is, and people would then seek their own definitions rather than experiencing the ultimate reality. In the left-hand column, we put the view of God, and as you see, God goes from the despicable, really the lower astral realms, are really talking about those energies that prevail in the lower astral domains, and going all the way up to God as infinite love, And as you move up, you move to a God that becomes progressively more experiential. The 400s, God is a verbalization, an abstraction, a definition, and it depends heavily on concepts drawn from history, primarily religion. Religious history is one thing, enlightenment is another. Huh? What happens in the beginning is a great avatar appears, who, for reasons which I can't go into today's lecture. The avatar appears, the avatar calibrates at 1,000 until at least recent times. 1,000 was the highest spiritual energy the human nervous system could handle. Even on the way up to 1,000, it is often very painful, agonizing, and extremely difficult. The energy as you go up to 600 becomes exquisite. In the high 500s, the Kundalini energy runs up your spine. It's exquisite. It's like an exquisite sensation, and it runs up your back and up the spine and into the brain. And if you think of the left side of the brain, it runs. You can run it into one side of the brain or the other, and it's exquisite. It goes on for, I don't know, remember how long it went on, a couple of years, I guess. And then it comes down and it would come out the heart, and heart region. And then it was also exquisitely pleasurable. Indefinably exquisite. And then on occasion it would go somewhere. This energy would, of its own. That's the time of the miraculous also. That was the time of the miraculous, and many of the so-called, what they're called siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S, certain they're called powers. They come about as a result of the energy field, which exists on its own, so that the miraculous happens within the field as a result of the field. It has nothing to do with you or a person. We're sitting in a restaurant in Korea and somebody says, "This is a lady we brought to see you." The lady sits down. She explains that one side of her brain has gone dead and is paralyzed. What was her? Remember the one side of her brain had gone dead, and all the doctors and this and that. And as she's talking on about this, I wonder why she's seeing me about this. I have no idea. And she's not talking to me as a psychiatrist, but she goes on and on about this thing. And then what happened? And then, I know. And then she stopped talking and she went away. And everybody marveled at that. And we got endless letters that this woman had become cured. Cured by the energy. So there was a period of years when that would happen all the time. And people would sit down and have all kinds of things and walk away fine. And I would just say, whoa. You know what I mean? It's the energy doing that. The energy has the capacity to do that. There's no decision on anybody's part. It's probably a karmic potentiality arises and brings the person into the field, and the field happens of its own. The Course in Miracles says the same thing. It's by the virtue of this Holy Spirit that the transformation comes about as a result of the self with a capital S within the other, within the aura of that presence. I forgot where I was recalling that. Oh, yes. So up to 600, the subjective experience is one of increasing joy, radiance, effortlessness. Everything happens by synchronicity. If you think I forgot a pointer suddenly appears in the world. And that's normal. That's what life is like when it's normal. It's because of the harmony, everything is in synchronicity, and things are not disconnected in time. They're is the point where there is not a this causing a that. There is a unity that from perception looks like a this and that, but it's all a unity. So as you think salt, the waitress says, would you like some salt? And it all happens of its own. To see how this comes about, you have to transcend causality, the ordinary understanding of causality, which we did in the first lecture. There is no this causing a that. Everything is coming about as a fulfillment of its destiny as set by the qualities inherent in its essence, because creation is continuous at all times. So you don't see a this causing a that. What you see is creation unfolding thusly. And as the electron on this side of the universe spins this way and this one is in concert, it's not that this electron is causing this one to react, but that which is unfolding this as the simultaneity of the two, which was expressed by Carl Jung as synchronicity. So there is no this causing a that. The field brings about the potentiality within the field. The higher the field gets, the greater its capacity to do that. As an electromagnetic field gets stronger and stronger, it can lift heavier and heavier particles of metal, you know? Mm-hmm. The ultimate source is the unmanifest. The ultimate source is the unmanifest, beyond all universes. There's an infinite number of universes, infinite number of planes, infinite number of domains, infinite number of dimensions, all coming out of the unmanifest. As the unmanifest becomes manifest, inherent within the manifest is the quality of creation. There's not a this God causing a that thing. Creation, then, the power of creation is that which accounts for your existence. So, the evidence for the presence of God is your own existence, because nothing of its own has the power within it to create its own existence. To account for that, for not seeing that, the ego thinks there's an endless string of billiard balls in a string called causality. God started the first billiard ball going, and now evolution has gone, and then after you leave this physical domain, God's waiting at the end. Oh, God disappeared in the meantime. Started the ball rolling, took off. Good luck, folks. I'll see you at the end. Judgment Day, woe unto you, brother. That which has infinite power then manifests as what we experience as existence. That godness is, that's what we call God. God is the infinite potentiality that can manifest as creation, as the universe, as all the universes and all the universes. To experience that that is the source of one's experience, of one's existence, that one is that which brings forth, it then is called enlightened. On the way up to 600 then, the journey is increasingly exquisite, extremely exquisite. In the high 500s, life becomes synchronous. One sees only love everywhere. One sees only beauty everywhere. Nothing else seems to exist. There's a period that you go through where you can't stop crying. There's in spiritual traditions, this is well recognized in certain monasteries. Anyway, as you get into the high 500s, there's a sensitivity to the presence of love. You're in an airport and a man looks at his wife with a loving glance and instantly you cry. It's just too much. You can't handle it. And that's one reason I don't talk about the way to God through the heart until later in the lectures. Otherwise, this would consist of one lecture. Because as that energy comes up, it's almost incapacitating. And prior to that, there's periods of high energy, of exquisite joy. Periods of the happening of what the world calls miraculous. There is a less and less awareness of the physical body. You can forget that it even exists and be surprised when you see it passing a mirror. I can remember wondering who was in the house. And that was the mirror. And one time walking through a wall, and bang, the physical body was still in this domain. Yeah, the nose got a little flatter, but it's sort of transcending identification with the body. So first we transcend identification with the body as I, eventually the feelings as I, the thoughts as I, and in the infinite state, even beyond consciousness. That which I am is beyond consciousness itself. It's that out of which consciousness arises. Out of which consciousness arises. That which is non-form is present in all form. It is out of the formless that form arises. So the journey to the 600s is exquisite. Making friends with your ego is the best thing to do. Learn to pet it, like it, love it, forgive it, because on the way you go through these extraordinary states. The presence of the, not paranormal, what would you call it? I don't know what it was. That things would happen even within the physical domain merely by imaging it. Electronic equipment especially would fix itself just like that. To this day, I can't hold certain thoughts in mind without the electric in the car going out. Somebody asked me to look at something negative, it can blow out the electronic things in the car. So there is some kind of a connection between the physical and the spiritual. Then, out of the high energy of the coming out of the heart, near the high 500s, there is a state of exquisite bliss. There is a state in which all is wiped out and the mind becomes silent. And one becomes immobilized. And that at 600, the mind stops, is silent. There's only the infinite presence of that which you are, beyond all time, beyond all dimension, and yet not different from that which is. All one and the same thing. And the divinity of existence shines forth through all that exists. That's why it's hard to function, because all reflects divinity, no matter what its form. So in that state, incapacitation occurs. Incapacitation occurs. And no function is possible. And whether the body survives or not depends on karma and that which is around you. And if the karmic propensity is for the physicality to survive, then the requirements to make that happen are there. To this day, the body doesn't eat unless somebody reminds it half the time. And we're not for very good friends. The body would be thinner than it is, so somebody reminds you to eat. But then beyond 600, usually everyone stops there. Out of those who become enlightened, 600, about half the people will not survive. Half the people will leave the world because you don't have to stay in the world. So the option to leave is available. From the high 500s, from 600 up, there's no necessity to hang on to the body. This is strictly an option. You can leave anytime you want. And to make it happen, all you have to do is picture yourself as leaving the body, and it happens. And then some karmic propensity from some higher level will prevail. Yeah. So we went up to 600. Oh, yeah, that goes from 700 to 1,000. We've never talked about, really beyond 600. But 600 is devastating. 600 is, I'm not sure how one survives it really. It's profound. The change is profound. And everything becomes silent. And in the silent, everything stands forth in exquisite brilliance. Shines forth as brilliance. Yeah. Consciousness usually stops there, doesn't go further. First of all, there's no further to go. One has already become the ultimate possibility. There is nothing and nowhere to go from there, so it would not come to anybody as an option. In that state, there is nothing beyond that state, because that state is what one has always been prior to what the world calls time, that which occurred in the snowbank at age 12 was already the infinite presence as self beyond all time, and the understanding that that which I am existed before before this universe or any universe was already a knowingness. So all this is non-verbalized. So the spiritual information from the high 500s on up never comes about as thinkingness. It isn't you think this and therefore you then reach that, because it's a non-linear. It's more like it's a presentation and awareness that just, like when you get up in the morning, you realize it's light out, nothing you did caused the light. It's just the light comes up of its own and illuminates all that is. So we never went beyond the 600s in our calibrated scale. And so we did recently, and we'll get to that. Anyway, this is the world's population. We did that, I think in the last lecture, the one before, we did it on the board there. And then Lou set it up on his computer while we were sitting there. But this demonstrates the world population. We were talking about calibrated levels of consciousness and how they are demonstrated within the world. And this is the distribution from a different, using a different way. I've been trying to fool around with just, how to best demonstrate it. We also played around with the diagram of a pyramid, in which, let's say 15% of the world's population is at the top of the pyramid, and then the pyramid is down. So the masses of mankind. So this gives us some idea where we are in the evolution of consciousness ourselves, you see. Where are we in the evolution of consciousness? Well, over here is the animal world, and then it shows up in the human, and then here it snarls, and here it gets angry, and now it begins to own that it has a responsibility, and it becomes aware of itself as an existent reality. And from 200 on, now we see the appearance of integrity. This is a different animal from over here. I mean, this is a different being, answerable to yourself from now the levels of spiritual awareness. That is completely a different paradigm of reality. So as we cross over 200 and up, we're in a different paradigm of reality. These are the states of intelligence, wisdom. This is Einstein and Freud and Sir Francis Bacon. The greatest scientific minds that have ever lived are all at 499. As we've said before, Sir Isaac Newton, Einstein. That's the level of the intellect. So 500 is another dividing line. 200 was a great dividing line. We said that 310 was suddenly becoming helpful, willing, and cheerful, and contributing to society instead of looking to drain it. This stops, here people stop projecting blame out there. They figure there must be something they did. They take responsibility. 400 is thinkingness, capacity for intellection and realization. The light of divinity really shines forth now at what we say is the level into 500, where the opening of the heart now differentiates between people from those that are loving and those that are less than loving, but still positively oriented. 540, it becomes unconditional. The purification continues, and then at 600 is this enormous transformation which cannot really be described. Generally, it stops at 600, and statistically, we found that 50% leave the world there, and 50% stay. Now, those that stay, what happens to them? Well, let's see. It's not of any statistical significance to the world because the number of individuals is small. It's of importance only the impact it has on the world. At 601 is blissed out, Sat Chidananda. Huh? Where is Sat Chidananda on there? Huh? What happened to Sat Chidananda? Oh, Sat Chidananda must be next door. Here's, I know Sat Chidananda someplace. You can't give a lecture on spiritual things without using a few Sanskrit terms to show that you're right. Can't talk about joy and bliss without mentioning Sat Chidananda. Why? Because spiritual people, you know, we've all read so many texts from different cultural backgrounds. So that, you know, please define God is, first of all, theological, coming out of the 400s. Then it's evidentiary, our knowledge of God, coming from those who traditionally have been called enlightened, from the avatar through the saint. So here's the avatar, Christ, Buddha, Krishna, Brahman, different names in different cultures. That consciousness at 985, a person at 985 has the capacity to send forth and radiate into the world an energy field which tends to recontextualize reality of all of mankind for centuries. What happened 2,000 years ago defines right through the next 2,000 years and 2,000 years and 2,000 years are definitions of right and wrong, value, the 12 commandments, the courts, the judiciary, its influence on architecture, values, mores. Human behavior is profound, even without being stated. So it's the power of that energy field which contextualizes the consciousness of all of mankind. So the value then is not specifically the specifics of a teaching, but the fact that an energy field at 1,000 appeared within the consciousness of mankind, thereby transforming it. Because power is a reflection of context. So a context at 1,000 has sufficient power to influence all of mankind throughout all of time. That power and that consciousness is still present, although the entity that came and left and reflected it to us has come and gone. The energy remains. So in the high 500s, we say we went from love to unconditional love. 575, we say those people are saintly. This is what people, the naive spiritual seeker, at least in the beginning, thinks they're going to find. They're going to find somebody who's saintly, walking around in sandals, with long hair, and a staff and a robe, who smiles sweetly at you. At that point, the sound of gongs is heard. Om is heard in the background. Incense arises in the air, and the great Om. Well, it doesn't happen that way necessarily. If you met enough Zen masters, you will know you're more likely to get bonk over the head. Wake up. So, anyway, sainthood may take the different forms, but when it first hits you, this is how it hits you. So you're not going to really keep your job at XYZ Corporation very long, sitting there blissed out in front of the computer, and you've accomplished nothing since this morning at 8. Nor have you moved or gone for lunch, and people begin to speak of you that he is maybe a little, you know. All right, at that point, most people leave the world. You leave the world, especially a complex world like New York City. And you come to a smaller place very often where other people are spiritually oriented, and your condition is permissible. It's permissible to walk around blissed out in Sedona. It used to be, I don't know if it is anymore, probably get you a ticket now, but when I first came here, you could walk around blissed out, and people would say, man, he's just blissed out. Which means you didn't need to change your clothes, didn't have to eat, you could get skinny, you never bothered getting a haircut, your beard got longer and longer, and you were just blissed out, and it was okay. It was fine. Hey, don't you think you ought to eat something? Your friends would say to you, see? So, all right, so that was a community, a safe community, and so therefore you often see a shift to community. People will leave a complex, demanding, because it's so much in form. And what happens at 600 is that the world of form is very, very difficult. It's very difficult to think in form. It takes energy, like understanding, comprehending in a languaging way what people are talking about. Takes energy. You have to keep saying what, and the meaningfulness of it comes to you in it comes from a different domain. So there's a translation of form into non-form so that one is aware of what the fish are talking about. Anyway, fish and I understand each other, but the nonverbal communication becomes progressively important. That's why the communication with animals becomes very easy. You and the animal know exactly where they're at with each other. Nothing needs to be said. Your intention is read in an instant by that animal. And you can read its intention and come back to it with what it needs to comment. And the snake will lay there, the snake will coil up and start to strike, and then this profound stillness and peace prevails, and it dominates the snake. The snake cannot strike out of that field because it's a field of perfect peace and safety, and it's more powerful than the snake. And the snake is just entranced with you and sits there and looks at you for minutes. He's never seen a human being before. And he's just wailed away from it, you know, and finally he goes away by himself and says goodbye, rattles his tail, and all is safe and peace because that is the domain which is prevailing. So at 600, then very often it's not possible to function. And those of you that are into serious spiritual work, it's probably advisable to have somebody that knows you doing serious spiritual work, because you can be thought of as catatonic and taken away to a hospital. That happened one time on a rock then there was nothing that would get the body off the rock at all. It was just blissed out, and no threat, no thought. Take it away, give them shock treatment, give them Thorazine, put them in the mental hospital. Didn't matter. Arrest them. Nothing got it off the rock, except love. The love for something that was about to happen got the body off the rock. So love alone had the power to do that. So I would say, because you can make sudden jumps and you can make sudden leaps in consciousness, and you will not know they're coming. You can be sitting there chanting and doing some releasing system or technique or something, and you do this every day for 2 hours a day. I meditated for that. And nothing seems to be happening, and suddenly walk down the street and find yourself totally in a different universe. So it's good that friends of yours knows that you are not catatonic, and if you have a silly grin on your face and get faint at the sight of love, that maybe they should just make sure you eat and look after you. So 600, many people, as they get close to that, they seek out spiritual communities. They join ashrams. They move to a place like Sedona, or at least the way Sedona used to be, where such states are understood and intuited, and people can tell when people are in sort of a blissful state. Okay, so what is the awareness then at 600 is, well, I don't know that I was ever in that state, but amness never came as an awareness to me. Never experienced amness. At age 3, as I've described before, I came out of oblivion, came out of the void, the belief in the void of previous Hinayana Buddhist lifetimes, that the ultimate reality was void. I was void. The misunderstanding of void as nothingness, which is a very serious spiritual error. It's made in the Buddhist tradition. There's serious errors in the Christian tradition. The Buddhist tradition is not understanding the Buddha's teaching about voidness. That which is nothing, no thing, is not the same as nothingness. Nothingness cannot exist as a reality, because for it to be, it would already have to exist, which avoids it already as a you know what I'm saying? And besides, there would be nobody to be there to talk about it, so there would be no speaking of void. It would be like what would tell you that the ultimate reality is void? It just disappeared, right? No, because no thingness. So that was the presentation at age 3 or 4 was out of nothingness, because previous lifetimes, due to that belief system, and I was a very arduous Buddhist monk, Hinayana Buddhist monk, went out of body, void. That's the belief system. The ego's belief in void can manifest voidness as a subjective experience. However, it's not the ultimate reality, or you would stay there. You don't stay there, because it's not the ultimate reality. Oblivion is a belief system. Anyway, voidness would happen. There were lifetimes in which that did not happen, and there's a lineage between the lifetimes. But anyway, this lifetime came out of voidness again, and wham, there was this body in a little wooden wagon, and it was spring and the wan sunlight going on. And of course, this 3-year-old doesn't know how to talk yet, doesn't know words or anything, and is stunned with the shocking fact of existence. Existence. And with the shocking fact of existence, instantly arose the fear of non-existence. Its corollary, its opposite came up. That calibrates at 9:40. That, I think, existence versus non-existence. Oh no, 8:40. So this was, the 3-year-old was already looking at the conflict, polarity in a very advanced spiritual dilemma of existence versus non-existence. Is the ultimate reality existence or non-existence? Is it one or the other or neither? No? In a non-verbal state, there was only the fear of non-existence, because if I exist, then it could have happened that I would not have come into existence. So there was the fear, the polarity of existence versus non-existence, which set the karmic spiritual conundrum to be solved in this lifetime. Yeah. It was already there. So if somebody has something about karma, you can't come in at that level without having done a lot of prior spiritual work. So this is a state of exquisite bliss. It's rare, and half of those who go into it never come out of it. The sense I am, God is I am, says, please define God. That's what brought all this on, folks. She shouldn't have asked that. Anyway, I amness I never understood. There was existence as existence. Then there was the corollary, the possibility of not existing. But there was never the thought of I amness. So the religious descriptions of God as I am, or I am that which I am, never had any reality for me. It still doesn't. Amness is a state of beingness. And the reality is beyond beingness or not beingness. It's beyond existence versus non-existence. is certainly beyond beingness. So I am is already redundant, Amness, like beingness, is an intransitive verb. That which is the ultimate reality requires no verbs, no adjectives, has no nouns, and doesn't need an intransitive verb of beingness, isness, wasness, or anythingness. It's beyond anythingness. So I amness to me is not exactly a valid statement. However, when we calibrate it, it comes out as 650. That which I am is existence. Anybody can reach through meditation. The letting go of identification with the physicality of the body as self, then letting go of the content of mind, becoming the witness of the content of mind, then becoming the awareness behind the experiencer of the witness of the content of the mind. You see, layer by layer, you withdraw your identification from the particular, from the finite, from the definable, from the material. That which I am is the witness of all that is, and the witness does not change depending on content. Yes?
How are you able to use language or the context of this reality when you feel your energy, you're not formed? How are you able to speak to people?
It happens of its own. In the beginning, it doesn't happen at all. There was no mention of it for 30 years. There's only a condition which prevented any participation in the world for a prolonged period of time. Then the body began to participate in the world again. I don't have time to check it out, but it's probably some karmic commitment or propensity to whether or not it continues. There's no necessity to continue, no necessity, but it goes about its business. It was a physician, so it went eventually back into practice. People would say, for instance, all human motivation disappeared. The mind is silent, and what the world calls human wasn't even there anymore. Even the idea of serving others, helping the world, making a living, all those things that were meaningful were void of, they didn't even exist. That which you are goes about that which it is as an expression of the essence of that which is. It has evolved into over eons of time. So this had the knowingness of the physician, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, practitioner. And it went back into practice, but when it did, the whole thing was totally different. There was dealing with, it was the biggest practice in New York City, and it specialized in severe illnesses, schizophrenia primarily. So the most hopeless of the hopeless came from all around the world. And this energy enabled the self to recognize the self within the entity that was all wrapped up there and full of drugs and in a straitjacket on the floor. And instantly there's a recognition and a inner healing within the entity, and it's healed. Whether it recovers in the eyes of the world was something different. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But the whole practice was transformed into a different way of being in the world. It went on of its own. Don't forget, it still goes on of its own. It goes on of its own right now. And there was no discussion or mention of the inner state. No mention of the inner state. No mention of it until the writing of Power versus Force in '95. The calibrated scale of consciousness and kinesiology gave a bridge. How can the nonlinear be meaningful to the linear? Well, traditionally it really hasn't, because even religion doesn't understand the mystic. The enlightened person, once you go up the scale, you become what the world calls, I guess, a mystic. One's inner reality is what they're talking about, but There's no recognition by religion. Religion usually gets quite in conflict with a sage, let's say, yeah, whatever you call them. Although it's the source of the reality of their own spiritual core, their own religion, the mystic is disavowed and very often considered a heretic. Way to get burned at the stake is to become a mystic in the Middle Ages. The bad time to get enlightened. 2000 is better. Because the reality as it is experienced is at variance with how it's described by God. I mean by religion. I told you this morning, the negative views of God as an arbitrary punisher, and that's, you know, that's insanity, you know, that's the God of insanity. How insane can you be to not know the top of the box from the bottom of the box? Is God at the top? Is the source of the light? Or as it religion says, he's at the bottom, the great punisher waiting for you with whips and chains and tortures. Oh, get away from it. I've been in hell, and no God would send anybody there. In fact, anybody who was evil wouldn't even send anybody there. It's beyond evil. It's beyond any possibility of knowingness of what it could be. Never encourage somebody to go there, folks. It's a really bad deal. Because, you see, that which you condemn others to becomes your fate. You understand? You cannot condemn somebody to hell without automatically precipitating some hellish conditions and experiences later in life. I'll get to the raised hand in a second. We just wanted to finish this scale, because somebody asked me what about God, and that's really quite a discussion. So, I amness never made sense to me. It still doesn't. It seems redundant. The word I is sufficient. I is complete and total. Because the ultimate reality of God is the source out of which consciousness and awareness arises. That which is unmanifest and manifests as consciousness, which radiates forth as the light within which one knows the content of consciousness as form and mind and meaning and significance and all that it becomes within the linear domain as best expressed by, whose domain is it? You know who it is. Newton. Sir Isaac. All right, self is existence, Sir Isaac Newton. These are terms from the world, and I'm trying to put them together just as I did the original scale. That which you are, self is existence. Self is God manifest is, we said, what is that, 700? Something like that. Those are the somewhat well-known gurus. The well-known teachers I like of recent years, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Ramana Maharshi, various ones like that. They calibrated 700, 740, around in there. The sage is 700. The sage seldom goes anywhere. The sage usually stays home. And people come and visit the sage. And the sage rarely moves beyond whatever level. When Ramana Maharshi hit 700, he fell down at age 15, felt he was dying, which is correct. When the ego goes, it's death. The only death that you can experience is the death of the ego. You can't experience death of the body because you're out of body. The body's laying there. I mean, it's not even interesting. But death of the ego, the self, that is a whopper, and it takes all you got to go through it. Anyway, so Ramana, who I checked him out by previous karmic inheritance, he had, he was 15 or 16, not particularly religious, just going about daily life. One day he falls to the ground, feels he has died. He felt himself dying. When somebody feels themselves dying, you know that they have hit the end of the ego and that they're on the threshold of enlightenment, which is what he did. So when he felt himself die, when I read he felt himself die, I knew this was the real thing, because that's exactly what happens. And then he went into a bliss state and sat there for weeks, didn't eat and didn't drink water, and was dehydrated and eaten up by bugs and stuff. It's comical because it's just the way it is. So anyway, these bugs are eating them, and he hadn't eaten anything, and drunk anything, and he couldn't care less. He's just in this incredible state, you know. And then there were, actually he was in India where there were some spiritually sophisticated people. They realized what had happened to him. They began to chase the bugs away, feed him, and give him to drink water and all. And he didn't speak for 2 years. It's very funny, because in the meantime, a fake guru, of which the world abounds, started taking credit for his blissed out state, India being more spiritually sophisticated than America. Here we would have taken him to the hospital, given him shock treatment, shot him full of Thorazine. But anyway, there was a spiritually sophisticated community. So this spiritual faker, and I'm telling you, there's a lot of them around, and you don't have to travel far to farm. So starts taking credit. He says, "This is my student. Look at his bliss state, you know." So he started signing up students right and left. Ramana, being in a mute state for 2 years, unable to speak or say anything, it had nothing to do with it. Of course, he couldn't have cared less. I mean, if the guy's making a living off it, so what's the difference? Yeah, if you're a statue, let the birds use you how they will. You know, it doesn't affect the fact that you're a statue. Yeah. So with coaxing and all, after about 2 years, Ramana began to learn how to speak. But the speaking, again, I don't know if he spoke of his condition or not. I don't know what he spoke of, but the condition cannot be spoken of. So finding the levels of consciousness gave a bridge to try to make the nonlinear comprehensible to the linear. As you go up the scale of consciousness, you see you're going from that which is definable, measurable, scientifically verifiable, to that which is becoming more ineffable. As you cross over at 500, you left the world of science. Science can't measure that, can't put it in a box, can't take its temperature, can't get its atomic weight, can't get its vibration on a spectrometer. It's left the world of science, the Newtonian paradigm of reality, and so 500 love is the real emergence of the nonlinear, the spiritual reality of the nonlinear, which is the presence of God as love. People say, you know, where do you find God? God is love. God is everything. Loving within yourself is already the presence of God. How can you tell? Anybody who's interested in spiritual work and spiritual development has already within them the presence of God that is pulling you like a magnet. So it's not that you are pursuing God, but it's like the magnetism of the self, that which you are, the truth of that which you are is drawing you inevitably to like a moth to the flame. Can't be resisted. So here's Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj, the same thing. That's why I'm telling you, you should have a friend that knows what you're up to. Nisargadatta, of course, ran a beedi shop. It's a cigarette smoke shop. Politically incorrect in today's world, that's for sure. But anyway, he ran a smoke shop and he smoked endless cigars himself. And he would get excited and pound on the table and talk to his followers, you know. And he had a little attic up over his beedi shop in Bombay. And he was merely practicing, I forget the mantra, the statement that his teacher had given him, I am all, or something, I don't know, something simple sounding thing. But he really focused on it. And of course, the real critical thing that works in spiritual work, which we'll get to in later lectures, is the fixity of focus. When you decide to really go for it, it means you cannot deviate from the edge of the knife for even one split second. If you're going to surrender every sensation, impulse, thought to God as it arises into the focus of consciousness, that has to be done with a fixity of purpose, which is like a razor beam. Enormous intention, and you're not going to get off the edge of the knife for anything. Hoops and hollers on this side, sad crying people on this side, wealth, happiness, radiation, seduction. Nothing gets you off the edge of the knife. When you start that, you better warn your friends, because the end is near. So this is devotion and dedication, and the way of the heart. You see, to live on the edge of the knife requires an enormous devotion. So the way of mind, which I tend to talk about in public because I can talk about that, When you talk about the way of the heart, you very often you can't study because the bliss state comes back and you're whopped out of it, and that's the end of the lecture. If you can come up and you can bless them, maybe, you know? So, all right, so you don't really have any say over it. There isn't any you to have a say. There isn't any this causing of that. There isn't any center point of the ego mind that is making decisions about what will be said, you see? In ordinary consciousness, you think there's a me that is making a decision to say of that. On top of that, you get purpose and intention, and it becomes very elaborate. I don't know how anybody manages it. No, what happens is because of the nature, the quality of the self within with a capital S, the Purusha, that core of the self, out of which the expression comes forth, happens of its own. The question arises from the audience. That affects the self, which then speaks back through this person here, this animal here. All right, so this we usually call a sage. This is Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj. This experience here, now we're getting into the sense of I, see? Because as that state opened up, that which I am, it sounds so stupid, that's not right either. That which is all that is, and the common nature through all of it is divinity. That which you are, that which is, and it's the experience of reality as allness. We mentioned the error of void. That is the ultimate reality allness or voidness? That's what happened at age 4. Poor guy, laying there in his little wagon. Whew, boy, anyway. What a conundrum for a 4-year-old. Well, so anyway, the ultimate reality is allness, see? Allness. So out of the conundrum of the ultimate reality as allness or nothingness arose the confirmation some 50 years later, or whatever it was, of self as allness. So realize that which you call I, that which is the self, that which is divinity, and that which is all that is, calibrates at, what does that say, 750? Yeah. All right, then from 750 to 800, what happens is 30 years of silence. Because the transformation is so stunning that you're struck dumb for 30 years. The mind doesn't think. To think in the presence of the infinite presence would be the ultimate absurdity. It's not even a possibility. So out of that silence then arose some kind of an awareness of this bridge and how it could be explained. How it could be explained, yes, how it could be explained. This came about of its own, this understanding of the calibrated levels of consciousness as a way of making the nonlinear comprehensible to the linear. The human mind is used to scales, calibrations, temperatures, and therefore the calibrated levels of consciousness seem to make sense. And, you know, we stumbled on kinesiology as the ultimate tool, and that the field of consciousness is infallible because it's based on that which is, that which has reality, and therefore it cannot be fooled. Therefore, the kinesiologic test is only a test of yes. It has no test of no. When the arm goes weak, it doesn't mean no, it merely means the absence of yes. Because the infinite reality is allness and existence and truth. Its opposite has no existence. And we used an example in a previous lecture. There's only electricity going down a wire or not electricity. There is no such thing as non-electricity going down the wire. Electricity is either present or not present. You understand? Things are either present or not present. Absence is not a reality. You can't take an armload of absence and bring me an armload of absence. Any more than you can bring me an armload of non-existence. You know what I'm saying? There is no opposite to God. There is no opposite to God. I think the beginning of the Course in Miracles in one of the early pages, I forget the textbook or the workbook, says that. Something about there is no opposite to truth. Understanding that eliminates all fear that there is no opposite to truth. And so we'd say the capacity to now communicate this would be 800. That's the teacher of enlightenment. And he has a title. Where is his title down here? He had a title somewhere. He had a title, so the world knows where you're at. In Korean. So 800 would then be the capacity to teach this. These are not great teachers, you see. And the reason for that is you can be the greatest piano virtuoso in the world, but that doesn't make you a good teacher of the piano. You can be Heifetz, but be a very bad violin teacher. So to be the virtuoso is one thing. To be able to convey it to others and share it, teach it to others is something else. So it's like a separate karmic kind of a commitment, I would say. Probably most likely a commitment. Is that a commitment? I never asked. We have permission to ask this, resist. That was a prior karmic commitment, resist. An agreement. That was a prior agreement, resist. Okay. All right, maybe for getting me out of hell, huh? All right, so that was 800. Now, 840, that's what occurred in this lifetime at age 3 or 4 was the confrontation with the ultimate reality as existence or non-existence. Were non-existence a possibility, whence would it arise? Existence, you see, because the unmanifest becomes manifest. As it becomes manifest, the God as the Godhead. So you might say the Godhead is the unmanifest, out of which divinity arises, and the nature of divinity is creation. And henceforth, everything that evolves out of creation itself has the capacity for creation. So all is in the process of being created as well as being creator, you might say. So things are not arising in the world out of causality, they're arising out of creation. Everything, what we call thing, what the mind calls event, is not sequential. It's only sequential from the viewpoint of the observer. Because you perceive things sequentially, you think that one thing is causing another. So if we have these balls, I'll do it from your viewpoint, A, B, C, D, the world assumes that you hit A with a cue stick and that hits B and that causes C, that causes D. And that's the Newtonian paradigm of causality. Actually, the way it comes about is that which causes A is simultaneously the cause of B, is exactly and simultaneously the same as the cause of C, and is simultaneously the cause of D. It takes the totality of God to account for the existence of everything at any moment, anywhere in time. Otherwise, God would have merely set the billiard ball rolling, disappeared off into heaven, which is up there. Don't forget, folks, you're down here and God's up there. That's the trouble with religion. God is transcendent. That's where the mystic gets himself burned at the stake. He says, no, God is immanent. That which is the source of life itself, within oneself, the source of existence and reality, the source of the awareness of your existence, is the presence of God as within as self, as the ultimate reality. And that is the truth of the enlightened sage, who says that God is not only transcendent but immanent. He doesn't say that. The sage knows that that which is immanent is also transcendent. They are not opposites. They're only two different ways of looking at it. That which is transcendent is obviously would have to be immanent, and that which is immanent would obviously, by definition, also have to be transcendent, to say that God is either transcendent or immanent. God is realized, the presence of God is realized as immanent, then we say the person is enlightened or a sage or whatever you want to call it. All right, and in some religions like Islam, to be enlightened is heretical by definition. Heretical by definition in Islam. Islam comes out of Muhammad, who calibrated at 700. So at its highest peak, Muhammad was at 700. And Islam has never done as well. It does better in forcing adherence. Islam is superior to Christianity in forcing adherence. And to bow to Mecca 5 times a day is quite an adherence. So it has a profound adherence, but its ultimate truth is not what some others have achieved. So the avatar then, beyond self and existence, the avatar at 985 is that power is sufficient to influence mankind throughout all of time. What's the difference between 985 and 1000? I only came upon it recently. I was explaining in a lecture or two, writing or something, the obvious nature of reality as it appears, and then realized that the Buddha differed. Oh. So we calibrated, the Buddha's law it was stated by the Buddha, the law of endless causation. So what I just said already differed from what the Buddha thought. The endless causation, that the cause of one thing is an endless series of causes. But to see a cause, you would have to have something that is caused. And to see something that is caused is already within the world of form. To see that everything is coming out of the spontaneity of creation, out of the essence of that which it is, calibrates at 1000. And the law of infinite causation, dependent causation, calibrates at 985. We just discovered that this week or something. So these are the great enlightened beings of all times, who had not only the capacity of the knowingness, but the capacity to express it in society in a way that was sufficiently meaningful that it recontextualized all of society for 1,000 years. So that's I as the ultimate reality, is the subject of the book I'm finishing. That which you experience as self, that which you say, when I say I, how can you experience your own existence? We experience that which I am as I, the pronoun I. It's very interesting that the pronoun I is capitalized just as the G is in God. The only pronoun that's capitalized is I. You would think out of humility, mankind would have made himself a small I. And God the big I, but he didn't. Why is I the same as God? I is capitalized and so is God. Is that grandiosity, megalomania, insanity, what? Huh? No, it's because the truth is that the personal I can only be known by virtue of the infinite I which underlies it. It's because of the universality and the infinite knowingness of the I, of the self, the presence of God within, conveys to you the capacity to be aware of your own existence as the small I. So the small I knows that it is by virtue of the infinite I, which is the source of its consciousness, awareness, and existence. To know self as I. So the ultimate statement Please define God, then, is God is the infinite I within and without. The infinite I of all that exists. Beyond all dimensions, beyond all planes, beyond all universes, beyond all divisions. Therefore, you don't want to bring down the level of I by saying amness, because I, as the infinite reality, is 1,000. And I, as amness, is already a considerable condensation, because now you put the condition of beingness and isness upon it. Beingness and isness means to come into manifestation, but the infinite I, that which you really are, is the unmanifest. The infinite I is the unmanifest. To say I am means that you are now manifest. It limits the realization of that which you are. At this moment, one experiences oneself as manifest. But that doesn't mean it's the ultimate reality any more than you are your body or you are your mind. Are we done with God yet? I've lost track of time. Should we stop for a break?
Wait, there's a question.
Let's have questions and then we maybe should stop for a break.